Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. On the show today, Mike Lousada. So Mike has a really rich background in psychosexual somatic practices of various kinds, counselor with the Psychosynthesis Trust, state-approved clinical sexologist, sex coach, and sex educator in the US. He divides his time between the US and the UK, primarily background in all kinds of somatic approaches such as Gestalt, body therapy, bioenergetics. It's pretty well published as well. It's been on all kinds of interesting media in the UK and abroad. So looking forward to chatting with you. Mike, welcome.
Hi, Mark. Thank you.
How did you get into this? What's your journey with the body?
Oh, God, I was so disconnected from my body for so many years. I was in such a cerebral world of working in a corporate life and even taking up meditation practice in my 20s, it was really about transcending the body and trying to get out of it. But I always had this kind of itch in the back of my mind that not only do I have a body, but I also enjoy being in my body, and particularly around sexuality, for example. And so I got very confused by the Buddhist teachings that I was paying attention to back in my 20s and 30s, which seemed to be all about denying the body and denying the experiences of pleasure and sexuality. So on the one hand, I started having very profound meditation experiences, but on the other, there was this kind of very middle-class British guilt and shame about enjoying my body and sexuality. And then I finally discovered tantra, and that suddenly was like a light bulb moment for me of a realization of the integration of sex and spirit, the integration of transcendence and immanence of being in the body, and the importance of embodying and feeling through the felt senses the experience of the world. And from there, I started to explore a little bit deeper my own sexuality. I was recently newly single at that time. And so just exploring with different people, had a lot of experiences which I'd say now were kind of, in retrospect, were kind of healing experiences, both for myself and the women involved, insofar as they were approached as a sexual experience. But what happened was that it seemed like something was happening in the way that I was being present with them that enabled them to release old feelings of fear, guilt, shame, trauma, whatever it was that they're holding in their system. And so I just noticed this, and I found it very beautiful and felt very honored at being present in those experiences. And then I started to talk about it more with people that I met in tantra workshops, and then women started to come up to me and say, well, do you think you can help me with this problem that I have? And it kind of grew from there. And my practice started more in a kind of tantric field. I'm probably best known for appearing in Naomi Wolf's book, Vagina, where she writes a bit about the work that I was doing about 8-9 years ago. But my work has evolved so much since then because it moved away from the more sexual and tantric towards the more therapeutic. And it's evolving again now as I'm working less with women and more with men. I'm still continuing to do work with women, but really increasingly interested in working with men to help them embody, to help them come into the full potential of who they are. So I'm on a huge journey with all of this work anyway, changing and shifting.
Okay, I mean, let's start at the beginning with something you said, the kind of sexual denial or the denial of the body being both present in maybe British society or, many of the cultures of people listening to this, and also in certain spiritual traditions as well. Could you say a little bit more about that before we go into your kind of personal journey here?
From a cultural level, I've struggled. I've taught in many places around the world, and I've struggled to find a country and a culture which really helpfully seems to embrace sexuality and embodiment in the way that I believe it could and should, because there's so much shame about sexuality. And as I said, I'm English. I grew up in a kind of quote unquote classic middle class British household where sexuality was seen as sort of sinful, dangerous at the very least. And there was a lot of shame about it. I had a lot of shame about my body, about my sexuality. But I think that's just a really common experience for many, many people. And it's something that's common across the cultures that I've taught in. Doesn't matter whether, we're with my wife and I, we've taught in Russia, we've taught in California, we've taught in a load of European countries, I've taught in Asia. It seems like there's so much shame in so many different cultures. And I've had clients from around 70 different countries around the world. It seems like shame is just endemic in all these cultures. I think that's just because it's such a potent energy. It's such a strong force that it's so easy to misuse it or abuse it or be abused by it. And I think that whilst pure sexual energy is a very clear, clean, beautiful thing, it's almost like, I think of it at the moment like a radio frequency. Like if you get on the exact same radio frequency of purity of the sexual energy, like 103.5 or whatever it is, it's pure and clean. The signal is crystal clear. But if you deviate from it somehow on either side, it gets a bit distorted. And I think that there's a lot of distortion around sex in a lot of different cultures. So I think that in a way it's right that it's kind of managed by culture, because it needs to be expressed very clearly and cleanly, and it's so easy not to stay clear and true on that pure frequency.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly come across sex shame in many cultures, but it strikes me that some are worse than others, and it's certainly different. Russia's not Sweden. There's differences in the kind of sex shame there, for sure. What do you mean?
Most countries have got their own particular angle on it.
Sometimes it's more the women that have to be ashamed of it. Sometimes more the men, isn't it? In Sweden it's more the men, and Russia's more the women. But different flavors of it. But what do you mean by sexual energy? Can you say something about that? I mean, how are you using that term?
Well, I think of sexual energy as life force energy, which is a kind of commonplace understanding in tantra or Taoist traditions. But it's really, for me, sexual energy is in its purest form. It is pure, it is clean, it is innocent. It's our natural spontaneous aliveness, if you like. It's the impulse to express our spontaneity and our vivacity in life. And the life force energy, I call it the eros energy, it is is the place that our passion comes from. It's the place that our enthusiasm for life comes from. It's the place where we feel that deep aliveness in ourselves. And when we feel that, then sometimes that's going to want to express itself sexually. What's interesting is as a journey to the body, what I have found is that we move through layers of experience, feeling, or memory in this journey towards our own being, our own embodiment. And this journey of coming home, it will always take us underneath the layers of the shame and the guilt and the fear and the trauma that anyone may have experienced. If you can allow yourself to move through those layers, you'll always move into a layer of sexual freedom and sexual expression. There's a layer underneath that, which is just this expression of pure innocence, like spontaneous aliveness. So that's what I mean when I talk about sexual energy.
I mean, are you conceptualizing it as a kind of physical energy that moves through people, like a kind of Hélène Vital kind of vital, something like electricity, or are you more using it as a kind of metaphor here?
I think it's literal. I think, my understanding of the universe and of everything that I can experience is that it's a vibration. It's a field of energy. So I'm a field of energy. The table that I'm got resting my computer on is a field of energy. The Wi-Fi signals are a field of energy. Everything is vibration. And sexual energy is a particular kind of vibration. Again, it's almost like coming back to that idea of the radio, of tuning into 103.5. I don't know what that is, but tune into that particular frequency and signal, and that's where you can access that energy. So I think it's a very real thing, and we feel it in our bodies, just as, the radiation, the vibration of light from the sun hits our bodies, and we feel that on our skin. Clearly it's a felt embodied experience.
And you've trained in kind of a wide variety of bodywork schools. I think this is for some people out there that might not be aware of how many schools there are and the kind of different approaches they have. Gestalt, body therapy, bioenergetics, somatic trauma work, Peter Levine's work. I mean, there's a lot of great work out there. Could you say something about some of that? I think you're a great person to ask about some of that diversity that exists. Like, what are the differences between some of these schools? Are there ones you're particularly recommending? Could you say something to this kind of
oh my goodness,
like, where would you start, right? Like, if I said, okay, I've got all the money and all the time in the world, I've won the lottery, I want to study this stuff, how would I begin to choose between going to bioenergetics or body therapy or somatic trauma work? It's there's so much out there these days.
Yeah. It's fantastic that there is so much choice, and that's something that's really exploded in the last decade or so. I think particularly as there's been more neurological research that demonstrates the importance of embodiment and of healing and clearing your energy system in the body. So there's a lot more science behind it now than there has ever been before. I mean, if you ask me that question, I'd say to you, well, what do you want to get from the journey into working with embodiment? Because what your end goal, your personal desired end goal is, will obviously, govern where you want to go. I've trained as a somatic trauma therapist. I've done some somatic experiencing stuff, Peter Levine's work. I've studied conventional massage, Reiki, all kinds of different schools. I think you just have to find get clear on what you want and feel into your own body, tune into your own body and see what your body's response is when you learn about different systems and different trainings or different modalities, because your body will know the truth of all of that. You can't really answer that from an intellectual perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I'd want to answer it from both a bodily, intuitive and an intellectual perspective, I would say. I don't want to just throw out the intellect in that, but certainly that, I see the value in kind of going, okay, what's my bodily response intuitively when I walk into this, one-day introduction, and how does that feel? I totally get that. Psychosynthesis is one, I know the Psychosynthesis Trust, is it just kind of in Tooley Street, isn't it? Just around
That's right, yeah.
London Bridge. Yeah. Most people don't know what that is. Would you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm kind of sad that so few people know what psychosynthesis is. It's a psychotherapy developed by a guy called Roberto Assagioli around 1910, who was a student of Freud and a contemporary of Jung. And he's really the first. I kind of wonder if, unlike Freud and Jung, who were doing psychoanalysis, I want to say that Assagioli was the first one to do psychotherapy. He may even have been the first person to sit in front of his patients or clients, as opposed to Freud and Jung, who sat behind them. But it's a transpersonal therapy, meaning it acknowledges not only your human, personal, egoic journey, but also the transpersonal, spiritual. So it sees us both as, individual human beings having our own life journey, being, messed up by whatever's happened in our childhoods, but also as spiritual beings. And for me, that feels really resonant. And it's a really amazing modality, and I really love it. And a lot of the work that I developed has grown out of that. My sadness about it is that originally psychosynthesis was called biopsychosynthesis to include the body. And unfortunately, Assagioli realized that was a bit of a mouthful. So he dropped the bio part. But in doing so, I feel that the emphasis, certainly in the training that I went through, although the body was acknowledged, it was much more about cognitive and emotional than it was about embodiment. And I think that's a great loss, because I really don't think you can do therapy effectively at a deep level without involving the body.
Yeah, and it seemed to me it was ahead of its time, and it's less well known than perhaps it should be as a field. And I've met some very good people that were trained in that field that I kind of really rated when I said, and it kept coming up, and I eventually started seeing it. And as I was walking towards London Bridge, I was like, oh, there's that weird word,
Yeah.
And then there's all the schools which are kind of looking at body armouring and kind of letting this kind of sexual energy, as you said, flow. And there's the sort of Western ones coming out of Reich. And then, of course, you've studied all the some of the Eastern ones, like the Taoism and the Tantra.
Mm.
What would you say is the differences or similarities between some of these kind of Western, like Reichian schools versus something that's more Taoist or Taoist or Tantric?
I think the Reichian school definitely acknowledges sexual energy, and so in that sense there is a parallel between the more Eastern traditions. But Reich used the term de-armoring. He talks about body armor being the condensification, if that's the right word, of trapped energy in the body. The way that I think about it is that we're energetic organisms, that when we're open, our body is open and energy flows through us freely. But when we feel this life force energy come through us, or if we have negative, adverse external experiences or hold internalized life beliefs that are negative, that energy doesn't flow through us and it gets blocked. And it gets blocked not only at a, inverted commas, energetic level, but also at a physical level through contraction in the physical tissue. And correspondent to that, there's almost always emotion trapped in there as well. So that's a kind of Reichian way of looking at things. I personally don't like the term de-armoring. I think, a lot of de-armoring practices that have been done and are still done in some of the neo-tantric communities are very much about breaking or smashing through the armor. And that is a really unhealthy approach as far as I'm concerned, because armor exists in our system for a reason. It's a defense that needs to be honored and kind of invited and loved open rather than broken and smashed through. So my approach is much more to be very gentle when I meet hard resistances and armor in the body, rather than kind of get my elbow into it and go work it really hard. I'm much more going to just really be present with it. And there's something that beautiful that happens through just presence, as I'm sure your listeners will know, that the body just responds when we can just be present without judgment. So that is a really powerful method, I find.
And there is this tradition, isn't there? This sort of a little bit 1970s now of kind of screaming and hitting things and really intense penetrative body work and throwing up into buckets. And it seems a little dated now, and also just a little kind of unkind and unwise.
Well, it's not only unkind and unwise; it's ineffective.
Yeah,
I'd be more tolerant of it if it was demonstrated to work. But what happens is people go through the pain stops, they release something emotional, and they feel a great catharsis, a great sense of relief. They get a massive dopamine hit from it, so they think that they're doing themselves good. But actually, it doesn't create lasting behavioral change. And that's really, I think, what we have to be interested in as therapists.
Yeah.
Is knowing what's going wrong and knowing your patterns and repeating them really isn't that useful.
Yeah.
And what matters is that we recognize what we're doing and we start to change behavior.
Yeah. I know I'm fucked up. Okay, great. That's a good.
Yeah, great. And now what you going to do about it?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So, I mean, the $1 million question, then, you've been researching this for many years. You've looked at all these approaches. You've developed your own, this is called the psychosexual somatic. Is that what you call your approach?
That's right. Yeah. Psychosexual somatic therapy, PST.
So what's your best guess at what works then? We can talk about what doesn't work, the pushing through the armoring, whatever. What's your best guess on what's working most effectively?
Loving presence. It's as simple as that.
Simple.
It's really simple. I mean, there's techniques that can help, but really, like 80% of what creates the change in people is presence.
Okay.
And 15% of it is curiosity, and about 5% is technique.
Yeah. I was doing an interview for another podcast as a guest earlier today. I was talking about embodied coaching, and the guy was like, hey, can you teach us some tips and tools and techniques? I was like, yeah, sure. But, what's more important is the coach's presence, the coach's ability to,
absolutely,
be, as you say, lovingly present. That kind of meta aspect is, and then the techniques can be quite simple. It doesn't have to be,
exactly
rock and roll.
Exactly.
And just help me get some of the terminology here, because my friend Adam Wilder runs this festival, and I was talking to him, and it's just been sort of opening up to me just for the last year. For a long time, I kind of rejected anything tantric as sort of long-haired men who can't get laid other ways, and need attention. And I kind of, now it's kind of opening up, and I'm starting to realize there's some really good quality people out there. You just have to find them. But sex coach, sexologist. sex educator, tantric practitioner. I mean, what do some of these terms mean?
God, I mean, so for myself, I did a clinical sexology training in California.
What's sexology? What is that?
Clinical sexology is the study of the science of human sexuality, helping people to understand clinically what's going on for them, what's going wrong, how to readdress that. So looking at one level, it's looking at functional issues, and a lot of sex therapy, traditional sex therapy, arises out of a medical model.
Yeah.
So it tends to look at and use language like function and dysfunction.
So someone might, just to jump in there, someone might say, hey, I don't know, I've got, I can't get it up, or I've got premature ejaculation,
Right.
or I'm randy all the time, and I'm trying to shag everyone. Like,
Right.
what, like, and they come to the sexologist and they go, well, maybe, it's your testosterone levels or something physiological. So there's a sort of medical aspect. And then there's the psychological aspect, like, oh, maybe it's because of your relationship to your mother, or
Exactly.
So there's these different aspects to it, and they're all sexology. Is that right?
Well, I mean, so in the UK, we don't have clinical sexology. That's a US term.
Yeah.
In the UK, we have sex and relationship therapists. But like I say, that sex therapy approach really comes out of the medical model. It looks at function and dysfunction. So my dysfunction is I can't get it up. I can't have an orgasm. My function is, I would be able to successfully get and maintain an erection and be able to have an orgasm, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, there's a psychological underpinning to all of that. My approach with all of this is that there's no such thing as a sexual issue. They are all intimacy issues. Because underneath the physical manifestation of the thing that's going wrong, I can't get it up. Can't, a woman can't allow her vagina to be penetrated, can't have orgasms. Underneath all of that is a fear of something in the person that is terrified of being witnessed, of being seen, that feels scared. It's about the fear of intimacy. So, yes, my approach is to help people who've got physiological problems, but to help them at the deeper level rather than put a sticking plaster on it. Because, for example, some sex therapists will say, well, you can't get an erection, just take Viagra.
Yeah.
That may or may not be effective. Actually, it's only of limited effect normally. But it's not going to resolve the underlying vulnerability. And that's really where you need to go. And the other thing that I would say about my approach, which would be echoed by a lot of people, I imagine, doing more kind of alternative sexual healing, would be that I'm not only looking at people's pathology and their issues, but also at their potential.
It's a pretty low bar, isn't it? It's like, okay, you can, get an erection or have some sort of basic vaginal lubrication,
right?
Slow clap. It's a pretty low bar for human potential.
Exactly. So, conventional sex therapy would say, well, if you can get it up and have an orgasm, then everything's working okay. The box is ticked. Move along now. But, I'm much more interested in helping people reach their potential, reach their capacity for pleasure, reach their capacity for depth and intimacy, reach their capacity for, becoming the most potent being that they can be on this planet at this time. That's much more interesting than, helping people get it up.
I think I'm with you on that. And, it's like sort of not dying of a heart attack and then actually being really healthy. They're two different things.
Totally.
And is there another trap in here? Because as I sort of start to explore this world, and this podcast's been part of that, actually, I've been talking to various teachers and things. I've, started to go to a few courses on myself and on my own and with my wife as well. I'm coming across kind of this, desire to be some sort of tantric super love warrior with kind of, like a Hindu deity with 1,000 prehensile penises for arms and, sort of giving women orgasms by looking at them, it seems to be this other trap in the field of becoming some kind of like a crazy, but then I'm also curious. I'm like, what are the upper reaches of human potential in this domain? In the same way as, I love to see a great athlete physically or a great musician or a great intellectual. There's also that curiosity I have of what is the upper limits of human. So here's the question: what is the upper limits for this in terms of human potential? And are there some traps in kind of wanting that?
Firstly, I want to say I have no idea what the upper limits are because think we've reached them. I don't think we understand what sex really is. I don't think we understand where that energy comes from and what it comes with. And I don't think we can really fully understand what it can do. What I would say is we can move from, the kind of reductive sexual experiences, pleasure that most people have around orgasm, for example, of what I would call a kind of pelvic sneeze for an orgasm, to a more full-bodied and lasting as long as you choose to have it last type of orgasmic experience. That's one level of elevation. But then there's a level of elevation far beyond that, which is about reality creation, which is about using that energy and our embodiment to actually manifest and create reality in this realm, which is a completely different level. And I have no idea what the limits of that potential are.
Okay, now you're sounding like a proper hippie. So here's what I want to, this is another thing that really jumped out at me. I'm looking at your CV here, kind of ahead of this call, and we chatted briefly on the phone. I kind of got a sense like, okay, he's a cool guy. He's grounded, he's done a lot of alternative stuff, but he's also got his feet on the ground. And what jumps out for me as I look at this, it's like National Health Service, Spire Southampton Hospital, hardly the most exotic place in the world, private, clinics at the Spire Hospital, and then Ezelan Institute on the faculty. I mean, that's like hippie central. So you're really walking in at some different worlds here, aren't you?
Well, I think what I'm interested in is I'm interested in moving beyond consensus reality and finding what else is out there and bringing it back to normal people. It's really easy. There is a massive trap in the spiritual community of getting lost in that kind of transcendent expansion. There's a lot of, the cult of ecstasy, particularly in the tantra community. You asked about traps.
Yeah.
And one of the traps I see in the tantric community is to get caught in the cult of ecstasy, to be pursuing the bigger or the next biggest orgasm, or the egoic aspect of like
power in it.
How
right?
can I become the most potent sexual healer that can heal all women or seduce all men? And it's massively, massively narcissistic.
It did. I've definitely come across that, like either the sense of chasing kind of state highs as opposed to wisdom, or actually wisdom that you bring back to people, regular people. And then also the thing around like, I've got this magic power, the sort of dark magician archetype. I've found people almost in this world have tried to intimidate me, or there's a kind of macho, like, I haven't had an orgasm in years, sorry, I haven't ejaculated. This sort of competition for who's ejaculating least, or who's making women come the easiest and the hardest. And it's very macho is what I've come across.
Part of my journey into tantra was because of my own sexual insecurities and inadequacies, and feeling like if I learned some tricks, I'd get better at it. As I learned these tricks, I realized that all I was doing was substituting kind of one set of techniques for another set of techniques, mostly which involved a lot of heavy breathing. And so I just let almost all of that go, because it's like such an easy trap to fall into. And I've just come back to real simple things like presence. It's the most powerful mechanism that I know.
And when you bring to this, to the sort of NHS, or to kind of imagine you have London corporate clients, for example, I think I do this in business with embodiment work, in coaching and training, right? And I actually think this is a rarer skill. I often say there's people who are far more embodied than me, but I can make it very practical for normal people. Do you want to speak to some of that skill of making, in your case, the sexual work accessible to people?
I think it's partly about languaging. If I call myself a tantric healer, that has a particular image to it. If I say I'm a sex therapist, that has a particular image to it. And there's languaging that you can use around this that makes it less scary for people. And there's also, just simple aspects like what you look like and how you dress. If I wear a long flowing robe with beads, people are going to perceive me in one way. If I wear a suit, people are going to perceive me in another way, right? So I think it's just really, I'm interested in expanding consciousness, but I'm interested in bringing that back to the people that most need it, because the ones who are already out there, they'll find their way into these alternative or tantric or whatever communities, and they'll work it out for themselves. but it's the ordinary people in normal relationships. It's not the people who are having 10 multi-polyamory, multi-fuckery relationships.
Yeah.
I'm happy to help them too, but it's just like, come on, there's so many normal people that need help.
Yeah, I'm really with you on this. And
shame.
Yeah, language and dress code are two of the sort of easy wins, aren't they? And as you say, how you frame it. But I think in many ways, this is the challenge of the modern embodiment age is actually integration with the rest of society. So it's really cool to see you're doing stuff for, with the NHS and regular hospitals and things like that.
I'm kind of less focusing on those corporate or those institutional avenues at the moment, and more just helping ordinary people. But it's definitely been part of my mission to, proselytize, to go out and speak to the more conventional sex therapy, the more conventional therapies, and say, look, this sexual work is really important, and it's, it can be done in a way that's safe. It doesn't have to be all about the tantric healer's ego, because that's a massive trap as well for people working in that field. But there's a way that you can do it safely and ethically and boundaried that makes sense, and just ways to talk about it that rationalize it to people, to help them to understand from their own point of view rather than imposing some weird esoteric view on them. Yeah,
starting with people's own point of view rather than imposing your own. I think there's a sort of empathy and a humility in that, isn't there? The other thing that struck me, you're spending half your time in California and half in London. Is that right, more or less?
No, I mean, I wish that were true, but no, I'm mostly working in London. And we travel backwards and forwards with that's my wife and I. We teach in various places, as I've said. But California is a place that's very close to my heart on a personal level. I love the wildness of nature out there. I love the combination of it's urbane and civilized and cool and interesting, but it's also wild and natural and. But I also feel, particularly in the Bay Area, it feels like, there is an evolution of consciousness happening around the planet. Yeah. One of the hubs of that, if not the predominant hub, I feel, is around the Bay Area, whether that's Silicon Valley or the bodywork movements that are going on over there, because there's a huge amount of bodywork happening in that area.
Yeah, it's massive, isn't there? There's other centers, isn't there, like Boulder and Austin and Berlin, other centers. But it's, I have a kind of love-hate relationship with California. It annoys the shit out of me, if I'm honest. And also, there's so much good stuff coming out of there, and we can't deny it. I noticed just with, say, the podcast listens, it's the biggest single audience by country is America, and of that, 50% is California.
Yeah, so it's doesn't surprise me at all.
Even as a state, it's probably getting more views and listens to this podcast than other countries. It'd be California, UK, New York, top 3 countries, as it were.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people out there listening to this from there. And I'm also aware it's a particular cultural perspective. And if you brought too much Ezelan into the NHS, I'm not sure how that would go down. I mean, how is it to be a sort of, because you're still, if I may, you still strike me as pretty British.
Yeah.
So, what's the kind of cultural tension there between the, a lot of these techniques which are very Californian and that Britishness?
I think for me, I've just found a way to be able to explain things. I think one of my gifts is to explain things to people that might otherwise seem strange in ways that can make sense to them. Just like describing, if you have stress at work, maybe you're going to feel tension in your shoulders. And so it would make sense for you to go and get a massage. And sometimes that when you receive a massage, some emotion starts to come up.
Yeah.
So that isn't really a far out stretch for people. But you can extend that by saying that, well, imagine that this stress is being held in your body for a longer time. You're holding stress from traumatic experiences in your childhood, for example. And that's being stored there until it's touched in a way that invites it to come out. It's quite easy to make that leap rather than going, I'm going to do some weird woo shit on you that's going to release all of your, childhood trauma. It's just about languaging it in a way that makes sense to people.
It strikes me, it's almost like a sort of seduction of the ordinary. I was kind of following that thread of the massage as if I, wasn't into this work. And it was like, okay, cool. And before I know it, I'm naked and riding a dolphin, but it's you've kind
I think you might be offering or going to different therapies than the ones that I've been involved with.
No, I mean, I'm just joking with that, but
that's fun.
but I just genuinely, I liked how you kind of, okay, massage, okay, yeah, and it's the same thing when I'm doing, body leadership work or whatever it is, that, and I think there's something quite British in that sort of down to earth, normalizing and meeting people somewhere beginning and then kind of taking that a little bit further that I rather like.
I think, one of the things is that I do tend to get reflective about that I'm pretty grounded, right? I'm like, I'm spiritually open and I'm like to think that I'm at least semi-conscious. But I'm open to a lot of weird and wonderful things, but I live a really kind of earthed life. I don't eat only raw food. I'm not a breatharian or anything like that. I like the fine things in life. I like a nice glass of wine and a good meal.
Yeah.
And I can relate to that kind of earthed groundedness, and I think that's just really, really important for people.
Yeah, I think if I met you in the street, if you didn't have the beads on, I'd probably go, oh, the guy's probably a doctor, or something
right.
educated but fairly practical would be my kind of guess, just from how you feel. I think that's why, I forget who it was, put you my way. So someone said you might like this guy. He's kind of, he's down to earth. Let's change track now, because the world's gone mad, Mike. Like, everything's bonkers. Now this won't be up for a few months, so it will be. But as at time of recording, my Facebook wall is absolutely full of gender wars. From the States, from the UK. There's some really good stuff in it. There's some frankly bonkers stuff in it. I'd love to hear your take on the current state of play of kind of sex in the media and gender relations.
My God, I think it's so interesting right now. I mean, there's fundamental shifts happening at many levels around the planet. Any way that I look at this and cut it, I can see that there's profound change happening, whether that's politics, economics, ecology, media, any of these things. There is something really profound happening in all of these different areas. I could talk a little bit about all of these kind of things, but one of the places that we're seeing fundamental change at the moment is around gender politics, and there's a lot of different ways you can look at this. I mean, one of the things is clearly there's been a very strong and dominant and often oppressive patriarchal system for millennia. Women, and particularly female sexuality, has been suppressed and has been abused or used as a mechanism for either manipulation by women or of dominance over by men. And that's really sick and unhealthy. And it's really fantastic that the Me Too movement has brought all of this to light, and there's been changes around all of this.
Yeah, some really good stuff. It's worth acknowledging the kind of good stuff and people saying,
absolutely, it's essential, right? It's essential.
Aware of this, like there's a great meme my colleague was sharing yesterday. Like, hey guys, maybe you're not aware of all the things I do on a daily basis not to be raped. And guys are just like, what the fuck? This wasn't on my radar,
Yeah.
And there's some really cool stuff in that. And
part of the problem is that, like I said earlier, I think I said, we don't really know what sex is, and we don't really understand what sex and sexual energy are and how to use them responsibly. So where we are in terms of gender politics right now is that there is a layer of society that still believes in patriarchy and the male dominance, however explicit or implicit that is expressed in their psyche.
What do you mean by patriarchy? I hate this word because it sounds like sort of all men dominating all women, but as I understand it, the sort of official definition is some men being in charge. I mean, what do you mean by that?
It seems clear to me that we do live in a society which is dominated by male power, that male ways of thinking about things are absolutely running culture in terms of, if you think about the rationality and the mind-oriented approaches to things, which I would say are traits of the masculine, and here I'm using the word masculine, and I'll use masculine and feminine as opposed to male and female, because we both have masculine and feminine energies within all of us, irrespective of gender, I would say. So, these very masculine ideas of the mind and this kind of dominance, they run the government, they run, whether it's run by a man or a woman, they run business, they run culture, they run pretty much everything. And the felt sense, intuition, the feelings, the more subtle things, which I would say are qualities of the feminine, they really get overlooked. So a patriarchy, I would say, is a culture which praises and raises above others these masculine principles. And because predominantly men tend to be more masculine than women, it means that it tends to be men in charge. So that's one thing I'd say about patriarchy.
Yeah.
And there's an interesting idea here, because part of it is culture and part of it is biology. Because as Jordan Peterson would like to point out, patriarchy is not about men. It's not about men being in charge. Patriarchy goes back 300 million years at least, and he loves to give the example of lobsters who have a dominance hierarchy. I don't know if you can hear me. We've just got some irritating leaf blowing noise outside.
Not too bad. It's not too bad. It's workable. I think Mike was have that as background noise.
Okay, great. Do you want me to go on? Yeah,
continue. Yeah.
All right, great. So Peterson talks a lot about this dominance hierarchy and citing lobsters from 300 million years ago as saying that they have a dominance hierarchy, and that's all we're doing here in human culture. And in a sense, that's right. So, biology and culture are very, very close together, but it's still a patriarchy in the sense that it's the biggest male lobster with the biggest claws that gets the most reproductive female, right? So it's the same thing. It's just lobsters are not human beings. So I think that part of the problem with the culture at the moment is, yes, that patriarchy needs to be rebalanced because it's out of balance in praising too much the masculine and ignoring too much the qualities of the feminine. This is an embodiment podcast, right? So one of the things about the feminine for me is that it's about being in the body and feeling and gut feeling and intuition and all of those things about embodiment, whereas the masculine is, for me, more a mental energy. It's more of the mind. If you take it back to a tantric cosmology, the masculine is viewed as consciousness and the feminine is viewed as energy. So we do need to have a rebalancing because there's too much masculine and not enough feminine going on. Part of the problem is that in that rebalancing, because there's been so much suppressed anger in the feminine, it's coming up sometimes in ways that are needlessly harmful. And of course, there's no defense for any man who's been abusive or, disrespectful for a woman. Although, I think we all need to own as men our capacity to do that. We've all looked at women with taking looks. We may all have used our intellect, for example, to dominate and overpower with the mind. The felt experience is a very common experience in relationship, that a woman feels that she's not being understood. What she means is she's not being felt, and the man is dominating her with his mind and controlling her with logic. That's the masculine dominating the feminine. So all of that's out of balance to me and needs to come back into balance. But part of the problem is that there's a lack of responsibility, both initially by men. As I say, we need to own our part in all of this that we have perpetrated. Doesn't mean all men are rapists and abusers, but almost all men have looked at women in an objectifying way at some point in their life. And women need to take responsibility for the consequence of their actions. And they need to take responsibility for the fact that things don't just happen to them. There is some element of she's not asking for it. That's not at all what I'm saying. But if someone isn't clear about their boundaries and doesn't say no, then it's possible that mistakes are going to happen.
Yeah,
I'm not talking about rape and deliberate abuse.
Sure.
I'm talking about subtle things. And I think we all need to take, men and women, we all need to take responsibility for our actions and be accountable for them. So I think that's something that's going wrong in the whole gender politics situation right now.
Yeah, there's a sort of overshoot towards sometimes privileging, and I definitely see this in the embodiment world, privileging the body over the intellect and making it all about intuition and feeling. And then, as you say, taking some of the responsibility out and framing it simply as kind of like all about oppression and one innocent group and one violent group, which I think is problematic. Though I wouldn't also go to the other extreme and saying, there's no such thing as a victim. Of course, there are some people who are just assaulted. They're done nothing. And as I heard you recognizing that, I just want to kind of back that up. Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's kind of difficult times, isn't it? It just feels like men and women are kind of at war. And it's a really tough. Yeah. I've had several very tough conversations with mostly with women, but some men, and just almost like a kind of civil war happening right now.
Well, I think it's natural that there's a rebalancing of power happening, and in that rebalancing, people are kind of jostling and trying to find a deeper truth and be heard in their own experience. And sometimes it's the wounded parts of us that want to shout the loudest and be heard the most.
Yeah.
And sometimes in this rebalancing of power, the seesaw goes too much in the other direction and then comes back again, and before it finds a place of equilibrium. But you need this kind of instability in order to create change, because change is a requirement for instability is a requirement for change and evolution. You can't, if you have stasis, you can't have growth and development. And it's clear that we've kind of reached the limit of what's not working in terms of gender politics at the moment.
I'm viewing it as a sort of painful. Sorry, Mike, I didn't mean to speak over you there.
No, that's okay.
I'm viewing it as a kind of painful growth stage. There's an instability, there's a difficulty, and a lot of empathy collision where, there's women saying, hey, we really want you to get the kind of the fear and the pain and the things that are done to us. And men saying, yeah, but we work really hard for you. And there's male suicide rates and blah, 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 and there's like this real empathy problem where people aren't listening to each other because the pain is speaking so loud.
Yes. Because all of that is probably true. There are horrific male suicide rates. There are horrific incidences of abuse and sexual objectification for women. And none of it is okay. But it's not a question of men are wrong and women are right or vice versa. We've all had our own woundings and our own traumas around all of these things. And, we need to take responsibility for ourselves, and we need to listen with empathy. Again, it's coming back to loving presence. Can you be with someone and hear their experience and just feel into like, wow, that must have been really shit for you. I'm really sad that you had that experience, whichever side of the gender they're on.
And one thing we can take responsibility for is our own personal pain and healing, right? Like there's a way in which it's like, okay, this is really on my radar. And it's like, my therapist and I talk about this stuff pretty regularly. There's body practices around it. And it's like, okay, I can do work on my side of the street.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, that is kind of all we can do. We ultimately need to take absolute responsibility for ourselves and our experience, irrespective of gender. That's just a much less profound level of understanding if we knock it down to gender. But we all need to take full responsibility for our experience.
Yeah. And you're actually working with your partner quite a bit. It's Dr. Louise Mazanti. Am I saying that right?
That's right. Yes, you are. Yeah, that's my wife. Yeah.
Okay. And how is that to work with your wife? My wife was my interpreter quite a bit while I was working in Moscow. And eventually we decided not to work together, though we have a great relationship. We decided that work wasn't the place to play with it. How is it to work with her?
It's beautiful. It's challenging. It evokes all of our vulnerabilities and our insecurities. It, of course, when we work together and we teach together, of course, it also evokes all the kind of parental projections. We become mum and dad to workshop participants.
Oh, yes.
So we know that when we walk into the room as a couple and we're teaching or holding a space, we know that that's going to happen. Sometimes we're good mum and dad, sometimes we're bad mum and dad, but we know it's all going to come our way. So there's all of this projection that we have to manage from the outside. There's also the projection that she and I have onto one another. And there's all our vulnerabilities and our insecurities between each other, and what is it for me to be alongside a powerful woman, and how is it for her to be alongside a powerful man, and managing all of that. And then there's all the enormous potential that arises from it as well, where we can really, really sit in the face of our vulnerability and stay present, maintain our sovereignty, and and what happens in that space,
Yeah.
because there's such a beautiful healing potential. And it's really, I feel like it's really, Louise and I both do amazing work individually, but it's really where we come together that we do some of our most beautiful work, I feel, because being able to hold the masculine and the feminine together as a couple, as a unit, it creates a very powerful field.
Yeah, I'm generally working in male-female pairs and encouraging that in my students now, just for balance, and also definitely masculine-feminine pairs, if not male-female, like yin-yang.
Yes.
If both people have the same genitals. It's, for me, it's like, we actually had this comment, Vilya and I, who's my Russian colleague, we're very close friends and very close colleagues, a lot of friendship, love, and mutual respect, nothing sexual there, but we get on very well. And someone at a recent training in France said, "Oh, you've healed my parental wounds," and how lovingly you talk to each other, and how Vilya was able to step in and have authority and say, "Mark," because at one point she said, "Right, you're not allowed to do that." And I said, "Okay, cool." We have like a veto rule where one can step in over the other one, and she has that real power, and I over her. And it's people to see a woman take authority and to see the care that we treat each other as trainers was there was jokes about it, but it wasn't just touching for people. I think it was genuinely healing.
It really is healing, because it shows people what's possible. And most of us, of course, didn't grow up in a family system where the masculine honored the feminine and vice versa. Or there was an equal balance of power. And so to be able to model that, and it's modeled through relationship, whether that's professional or personal, it's modeled through how we embody, like how we move our bodies in the space. It's not just who's talking the most. It's like, how do you physically fill the space? All these kind of interesting subtle cues that people pick up, and they feel it through their body and their system, and it is enormously reparative.
Yeah, sometimes it's misunderstood culturally. My wife is very quiet and has a sort of we have a Slavic model of marriage, and we did a few videos together talking about attraction, and some Dutch feminists complained that I was talking more than my wife, and all the Ukrainian friends kind of laughed at the Facebook comments saying, "Yes, but he's talking because she wants him to." Like, and the way these things can be misunderstood, I think, is quite interesting as well.
It's really been an interesting journey for us, because Louise was very successful in her own right, a professor at 35 years old, teaching in Stockholm, addressing the United Nations on her topic, enormously successful. And then she moved into a world where I was better known. And so we had to kind of recalibrate to find a level between the two of us. And also she's Danish and I'm English, and there are different cultural memes in these countries. So it's been a fascinating journey and continues to be that.
Yeah, I definitely.
Very beautiful.
The cross-cultural stuff is interesting, isn't it? Like when Vilya and I co-teach in Russia, it's assumed that I'm the boss because I'm the man, and also I'm the big deal foreign trainer. Whereas when she comes to England, she's the exotic one, and it's sort of perceived differently in different cultural contexts.
Yeah, I've found different countries have different levels of patriarchy, I want to say. And actually, the most patriarchal country that I've taught in is actually in Russia, where we've taught, and that was just interesting to observe. But yeah, every country is different. It's fascinating.
Well, shout out to all my Russian friends and colleagues. There's I was just in Russia 3 days ago, and the cold that you're hearing in my voice was picked up there. So yeah, lots of experiences there. I'd point listeners to Alexandra Vilvoskaya's podcast on cultural differences if people are interested in sort of the Russian thing a bit more. There's been a few other Slavic speakers, but that's one. Also point listeners to some of the other podcasts we've done on sexuality. Gaytree did one. There's been Lynn from Sweden. There's been Holmquist. There's been various people on if this topic's been interested to point out. Mike, is there any topics that are kind of really hot for you that you want to chat about before we move towards wrap up?
Yeah, there's a whole other piece really which I'm interested in, which is there is this cultural shift happening around the planet, and why is embodiment important around that? And so what I see happening is that a lot of old systems are failing, and we are in a stage of potential collapse of old systems, economic, ecological, governmental, and so on. And the question is, how do we come back into calibration? Like, what do we need to do to ride the rapids of the change that we're undergoing? And I think part of the problem has been that we've been too much in our minds. We've tried to analyze things from a mental perspective, and we've disconnected from our bodies. And because we've disconnected from our bodies, we've disconnected from nature. And because nature is an extension of our body, or we're an extension of nature. And so when we disconnect from nature, we can abuse it and we can exploit it. But it turns out that long term, this isn't working as a really good strategy.
Who would have thought?
Yeah. So I'd say we absolutely need to come back to embodiment.
Yeah.
We need to come back to it because we need to come back into connection with nature and heal what we're doing to the planet. We need to come back into embodiment because it is through the felt sense, the feminine, if you want, that we're going to be able to feel, develop empathy, which is also something that's lacking in the patriarchal, male-oriented cultures, and develop our intuition, which I think is also going to be increasingly important. And so I think that coming back to the body is not just important for our own personal healing, for our health, but I think it's absolutely essential for the survival of humanity as a species. So that's what I want to say as an ending note, perhaps.
No, that's beautiful. The why. Well, because we can spend a little time in the why of embodiment, Mike. And I like the very un-British way you kind of said the power of that and the importance of it. You know, I will often frame it like if we're disconnected from ourselves, we disconnect from other people, and we disconnect from the planet, and as a result, we do violence to all three.
Yes.
Like this is, you know, those three levels of it. This is really, you know, some of my students are teaching ethics to the other day, and it was like, look, ethics isn't just don't fuck your students, or, you know, like, or don't touch without permission when doing a yoga class. Ethics is at the very core of embodiment. There's a suggested reconnection which has profound ethical consequences right at the core of this whole work. And, you know, sexuality strikes me as a way in which people disembody. They don't want to feel that shame, that embarrassing, that powerful, you know, back to what you were saying at the beginning side of things. And so they cut that off, and they're almost always certainly cutting off part of themselves when they do that. And there's an ethical consequence to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's only through embodiment that we come out of these more limited constructs of like egoic truth and mental truth, which are, you know, arising from culture, but we can drop down into the felt experience of deeper truth, because truth is an embodied experience. When we speak truth, when we hear someone speak truth, there's something that happens in our body, like something comes into alignment. It feels to me like my spine comes into alignment, my diaphragm relaxes, and my system goes, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Even if it's something that my ego is uncomfortable with, my body will acknowledge it as a truth.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the body is a really good barometer for measuring truth if we tune it accordingly. But then we move deeper from personal truths to, like, let's call them universal truths. And I feel that that's part of the journey that we need to make as a species right now is moving away from ego and moving towards deeper universal truth.
Yeah.
Like, you know, respect for all living beings, these kind of many Buddhist principles.
Nice. So body is a barometer for truth. You know, this, we feel stronger, and actually, if we look at Paul Linden's work, one of my teachers, you actually get stronger. You know, that's testable when you speak the truth. But after a while, you learn to tune into that without having to have someone push on you and actually test your posture.
Exactly.
Like, there's a way in which it's like, yeah, no, I'm aligned. Something's aligned here, and that's felt.
Yeah.
Okay. Beautiful stuff. I guess just to wrap up, like, if people are interested in your work, where's a good place to go?
Sure. Come see me at mikelousada.com. I also have a website with my partner, mazantilousada.com. I guess you'll put the links at the bottom of the podcast afterwards. And there's a list on either of those websites of the workshops that we do. I also do one-to-one sessions, either in person in London or via Zoom around the world. So yeah, come and find me. And I'm always interested in, deep and interesting conversations about embodiment and the evolution of consciousness. So yeah, welcome.
Mike, thank you so much for joining us today.
Mark, thanks so much. It's been great.
Subscribe to get more. And you can also leave us a review on iTunes, which helps with our rankings. So really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support the podcast even more, then fund us. Go to Patreon, give us $1 per episode. Those who don't know, Patreon's a really good way of supporting things you want to see more of in the world. I know so much is available for free now, and what I'd say is a lot of energy and effort goes into this podcast. I put it out there for free so everyone can get it. More than I work on this. Everyone that wants it can have it for free. And if you want to support us, it is really appreciated. So it's patreon.com/Mark Walsh. And of course, if you want any in-person training, you can visit embodiedfacilitator.com. There's loads more resources there too.
Till next time, welcome home to the body.